Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the latest in a series of videos I'm doing looking at, well, I started off looking at the various regions of Westeros, and now I'm moving over into Essos. What we'll do today is we will be tackling the city of Volantis, which is a huge city, probably the largest city in terms of population we have, certainly in the sort of the western part of Essos, and larger than anything we've got in Westeros. And we'll also pick up on a few of the other free cities as we go. We looked at Bravos last time, but if you've got any thoughts or questions about some of the other free cities, then now is probably the time to drop them in. But I thought I'd start off, before we get into that, I try to bring you sort of the news about what's going on in the, sort of the wider world of A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, things like that, what we're going to be getting and when. And I thought today is a good chance just to take a step back about what is going on with all of the Game of Thrones spin-offs, because it seems like almost every week recently we've been having some other idea being thrown at us, a new thing going on here and there. And I had a question over on Patreon from the Red Woman saying, hi Robert, you talked last week about the shows HBO is possibly developing in the Song of Ice and Fire world. Just wondering which ideas you are most excited about and which ones may be most likely to be made other than the House of the Dragon. So I thought what I'd do was just quickly run down. I know I sometimes lose track of exactly what there is out there, so I'm sure the rest of us do as well. Run down what it is, what we're told is in the works, where it's got to, and so on. So the first thing is obviously House of the Dragon. We know about that. I'm not going to talk about that too much. Other than to say, it will probably start production actually quite soon. I mean, I did hear April was the plan. It is obviously now April. We've had casting announcements. We know where they're going to be filming. We know who the showrunners are. So it's not far away now from starting. So that could be up and running at some point reasonably soon, certainly within the next few months, I imagine, with a view to it appearing on our screens next year. So that's the idea there. Now, scrolling back a year or two, we were told that HBO were looking at, I think they said 5 different ideas at the time. The first of those was what became known as The Long Night. They did a pilot of it, as we know, and decided not to pursue it. The second of those is what turned into House of the Dragon, and there were perhaps 3 other ideas. Now, we do not know whether those ones are the things that we're talking about now, or whether they're other things that are just sort of on a back burner somewhere, but that's all gone a little bit quiet. But what we have now is George R.R. Martin has signed, and I think they called it a mid-8-figure deal, so $50 million or so, a lot of money, for an exclusivity deal with HBO to be making things in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. And we've been getting this succession of ideas being put out there. Now, the one that happened most recently, and the Red Woman, just to answer your question directly, the one I personally am most excited about is the thing which was announced just a couple of days ago, which is a stage play of the tourney at Harrenhal. Now, this is very exciting. I'm imagining this to be in the same way that in the Harry Potter universe, then they had The Cursed Child, which was a sort of a spin-off as a stage play. That, incidentally, is actually 2 plays done over a day, a morning or an afternoon and an evening, or morning and afternoon. A lot of stage play. It's not just like a 2-hour thing in and out. It's a lot of story. So I'm imagining something like that. And George R.R. Martin has said in the past about the tourney at Harrenhal that if he ever, there's so much happened at the tourney at Harrenhal that we haven't heard about yet, that you could write a whole book just about what happened there, and a whole George R.R. Martin book, a whole massive book about it. So there is a lot to unpick about what's been going on, and we've seen it. There's a passing comments in the World of Ice and Fire, and then just sort of a few reflections and memories in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is enough for us to know that it was hugely important. It set in train the events that led to Robert's Rebellion, and so much more. I am hugely excited by this, because we've been told that they're looking for this. Maybe they've been writing it during lockdown, so this isn't just a new idea. This is actually already in development. George R. R. Martin has had an input, apparently, which means that what we're going to get is going to be at least semi-canon. And they will not be able to do this without revealing some huge truths about what was going on. They're not just going to make up random new stuff. This is things which will fit into the story of A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, I suspect that the iteration that George R. R. Martin is hoping for is that he finishes The Winds of Winter, then the stage play happens, then after that, then after that, A Dream of Spring. I'll allow you to decide whether or not that is likely, but that is clearly what his plan is. But regardless of whether we get new information about it in The Winds of Winter, what we will definitely have is, certainly we will start learning about things like, was this really, as it seems to have been, Rhaegar's attempts at effectively forming a coup against his father, a great council by any other name? What about the Night of the Laughing Tree? Was this Lyanna? Almost certainly, but we haven't had a proper confirmation yet. What about Rhaegar and Lyanna meeting there? They almost certainly did, but we haven't got full canon confirmation of it. A whole load of other things that I personally would be very excited in. Ashara Dane, we will definitely meet who's there. Does she meet Howland, as I and I know several others are very excited to see? What actually happened at that dance that we hear so much about? That Howland was there, Ned was there, everyone was there. There is so much going on. We will see lots of characters that we know in their younger days. Robert Baratheon, Ned Stark was there. We'll get Rhaegar, we'll get Arthur Dane. There are so many fantastic characters who are going to be there and be present. It's going to be very, very exciting. So that's the thing I'm most excited about. But the idea is for this to be a universe of content about A Song of Ice and Fire. So we're not just going to have the one TV show that we know about and a stage play. We're going to have lots of things. And what we've been told about so far is, yes, we're going to have House of the Dragon, but we're also going to have a few other things. They're still working through them. There are hints of Dunk and Egg. Now, the fact that that is out there tells me that George R. R. Martin has changed his mind on this. Before, he said he didn't want Dunk and Egg done. Now he seems to have been won over to it. So I think we will get something to do with Dunk and Egg. I'm also obviously very excited about that. But we were told 3 new things, and another that we're getting a series of leaks out to Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Entertainment Weekly, places like that the HBO are just sort of dropping stories out just to keep people excited, and also to gauge reaction, see if there's anything that people are really loving the idea of. There's anything people are really not loving the idea of. The 3 things we were most recently told about were a TV show series based on the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, and that would be called 9 Voyages. Now, this has got very much a kind of a Sinbad kind of feel to it, and it would, in effect, be a spin-off of the spin-off, because we're going to be meeting Corlys Velaryon in House of the Dragon. So this would be a sort of a spin-off of that character. I suspect they will want to see how that character lands before committing to it. If people hate the character for whatever reason, then they might think twice. But this has got a name rumored to be attached to it. Bruno Heller, who produced Rome, if you remember that, which was excellent, by the way, but sadly short-lived, and also more recently-ish, The Mentalist and a few other things. So that's quite a a high-powered name attached to that, so I would think that's probably quite likely to happen, but it might be a little way down the line. Second thing we got told about was 10,000 ships, the working title for Nymeria and the Rhoynar arriving in Dawn, which has a lot of potential. You can start the story over at the River Rhoyne. We can have the Second Spice War. We can have the Rhoynish people having to leave, deciding where to go, getting into their ships, eventually ending up in Dawn. There's a great story there, and all the things that happen once they arrived in Dawn. And then the third of these ideas that we've been told about is Flea Bottom. No more detail than that, but the clear implication is that this is going to be looking not at the nobles of this world, which is what basically we have been shown all the way through this, all of the nobles and the well-to-do people, the 1%, but actually the small folk, the working class level people, the normal people in King's Landing. Stories are revolving around that. The sort of the feel is more kind of Peaky Blinders-y, kind of what's going on in the underbelly of the city rather than what's going on in the castles and keeps. So those are the ideas. We've also got this idea that they haven't sort of given us any more on, the idea that there might be an anime, something, TV show, film, who knows. So there's lots of things out there. I personally expect that we will see a goodly number of them. I think that the stage play is definitely happening. I think that we will see Dunk and Egg definitely happening, and probably at least two of those other things happening as well. They will have different budgets. They will be targeted at different audiences, have different feels, and I think that we're also going to see them operating in different ways. So they're not just going to be a standard TV show, 8-10 episodes in a season, yearly basis. Some of them will be standalone. Dunk and Egg would work much better with this, in my view, to have standalone, almost movie-length stories there, and also we might get some actual full-length movies out of this. So that's what's looking likely. HBO are not going to go small on this; they're going to go big. So expect that most of the things they've been announcing or leaking will come to fruition, but that's not the final list of everything that's going to be there. Marcus Prasad, thank you so much for the super chat. Didn't see a question attached to that one, but if there is one, do let me know, or let one of the moderators know, and they will try and flag it up for me. Thank you. Oh, here we go. Done it already. Thank you, Chrissy, for picking that one up. My first live stream. Hello, Robert. Can you talk about the religions in the free cities and how they compare to the real world? Yes, I will happily do that, Marcus, in just one moment. I'll quickly flick through the other super chats and super stickers. I've got some questions from my patrons about the religions, but the main thing to say at a high level, I'll address first before digging into it a bit later on the specifics, is that whereas in Westeros we think of there being the one prevailing religion, and then some areas have got their own religions. So we got the Faith of the Seven, but then in the north they keep the old gods, and then the Iron Islanders have their own religion. That's not really the case over in the free cities. In the free cities, there are many religions in almost all of the cities. And so you take Bravos as an example. They have the Isle of the Gods, where there are just many, many temples and lots of different deities worshipped. So there is no one overarching religion. The closest there is R'hllor, that seems to be worshipped almost everywhere. Some huge temples, some small temples, but does seem to have a foothold almost everywhere. But I'll dig into more of the detail on that one later. Cloaked One, thank you so much for the super chat. Also picking up the same question from Marcus. Thank you. I love it when people do this, and quite rightly saying it's Marcus's first live stream. So welcome, Marcus. It's great to have you here. If this is your first live stream, it's great to see you. Question from Higa Herga. hi there, saying if we could get a pirate episode and actually see a Shy by the Shadow, that would be beyond amazing. Yeah, so the thing about the 9 Voyages thing is that this, and quite a few of these, is that we only have just literally a few lines of text in Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire to tell us where the Sea Snake actually went. We know about something, we don't even know each time where he went. I think we've had 3 or 4 of them have been described, but the rest, he could go anywhere. He could discover anything. This is more than anything else the thing which will open up the series, which would open up the entire world of Ice and Fire. Flea Bottom necessarily stuck down where it is. We know what's going to happen with if they go the 10,000 ships, the Nymeria one, that is very clearly set in one area. Then there's a sea voyage, and then another area. We know about where Duncan Egg is, very much set in Westeros, but Corlys Velaryon did explore the world. He can go to all these different places, and so that will be absolutely fantastic if we can do that in terms of discovering the new world, new bits of the world that we haven't seen before. Carlos Enrique, thank you very much for the super chat. So I was just laughing, not there at Nikki Copes or Copes, just below that, saying somehow I can't imagine Robert watching an anime. You may be surprised, but Carlos, I couldn't see a question attached to that. Let me know, or let one of the moderators know if there was, and I'll try and pick that one up. Heather Vitt, thank you very much. Very kind super chat, saying, you're the best, Robert. Glad I caught this one live so I could show some appreciation. You keep me sane while I impatiently wait for wins. Well, we're all getting impatient, but he is, and that's the thing. I should have ended that segment there on. George R. R. Martin has reiterated again his priority. Yes, this means extra work for him. Let's not pretend otherwise. He is a prodigious gatherer of new projects. That's just his nature. I think we have to accept that this is the way, but his priority is on the Winds of Winter. That's what he's doing day in, day out. Yes, he gets distracted onto other things. Yes, he does have many, many other projects on the go, but his priority is the Winds of Winter, and he is writing it. So yes, it will happen. Every single day we don't get it, it's getting bigger. So it's going to be more for us when it does arrive. Question. Carlos Enrique, thank you so much, saying, could Flea Bottom be an origin story for Dunk? Yeah, so Dunk is one of 2 great characters who sort of originate in Flea Bottom, the other being Davos, of course. Could it be an origin story for him? It could, but my general feeling is that if they are going to do Duncan Egg, that starts with him actually relatively young anyway. He was a squire. So the story of him being in Flea Bottom would be him as a child. Now, that's entirely possible. They might want to go down that way, but I think that they're trying to go as many different routes as they possibly can. And just picking the same character for 2 things, I think they probably won't want to go down there. I also think, I suspect that they want to have different feels for these different ventures that they've got. And Flea Bottom, I think, is going to be the gritty one. That's how they're going to go with this thing, more Boardwalk Empire, as I say, Peaky Blinders, that kind of thing. That is the feel that I think they will probably be wanting to go with this. Dunk is just too pure, too good, too nice. I don't think it would quite work with that. But I may be wrong on this one. Question. I'm sure I had some more questions in here. Yes, I did. Dominican Stud 101, thank you very much. Saying no question, but wanted to say you're awesome. Thank you very much. Currently eating tuna with crackers. Excellent. I do love hearing what people are doing while they're watching or listening. Tuna and crackers sounds delightful. And Cloaked One saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day. Unfortunately, can't stay for the rest of the stream. Cloaked 2 and I, nice like that. Cloaked 2 and I are beginning the drive back to my hometown. Just wanted to say that you're the best, and we appreciate everything you do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. Safe travel. I assume down under. Ariel Winchester, hi there. Thank you so much. Just showing some love for my favorite YouTube content creator. Thank you. I'll have to watch back tomorrow due to nursing school homework, but look forward to hearing your thoughts on Volantis. Thank you so much. Well, I hope that your homework goes well. Nursing school, excellent. Well, I was going to say, well done on a choice of career. I think at the moment the world needs as many nurses as we can get. So thank you for that. I think that's me caught up on the chat for just the moment. Although I did have a few before we went on air. Roman Lakovets saying the wait for wins has been grueling for all fans. Thank you for making it easier with your content. Thank you very much. Alhad Parashakar saying, hi, Robert. No need to pronounce my last name. Too late. Tried it. Apologies. Do you think that the story of the Tattered Prince will have any significance given that Illyrio is in Pentos? Yes, I'm sure I will come onto this a bit later, but I will happily talk about this now. The Tattered Prince is a book-only character, but a fascinating one. And you have to kind of dig into how Pentos works. So Pentos technically is ruled by a prince. In reality, it's not. It's got all these rich magisters like Illyrio who sort of run the city. If they've got money, then they're really in charge. But technically, they claim to be run by a prince. This prince is chosen from among them, and they just live the lap of luxury. They get servants, and they get beautiful food. They have feasts. They get everything that they could possibly want, until something goes wrong in Pentos. If there's some bit of famine, they lose a war, then immediately that prince just gets beheaded, and they just create a new one. And the Tattered Prince was somebody who was chosen to be this Prince of Pentos, and as a young man, and he had a look at the job description and thought, actually, you know what, I'll pass. And so he went away, and he went off to the Disputed Lands, and he became a sellsword, and he eventually set up the Windblown, this sellsword company, and he has ended up outside Marine with his sellsword company, and it would appear, wants to rule Pentos. He wants to go back home. He's a lot older nowadays, but he wants to go back home, and he deals first of all with Quentin Martel, then with Barristan Selmy, and basically, although Daenerys initially wasn't wanting to give him the time of day, Barristan, the situation's got a whole lot worse, and Barristan's basically given in and is saying, yes, okay, you help us out, and then you can have that. That will have a payoff later in the Winds of Winter. So yes, it will do. My general take is that he will be supported to take Pentos. And the way I see this working is that if you think about how it happened on the show as a starting point, that Daenerys gets everybody onto boats and then sails them across to Westeros. She gets the Dothraki on that. Dothraki do not like boats. They do not like sea voyages. And telling them they're going to go on many months worth of sea voyage, no, that's not the way that it would really work for them. Yes, if she is there, the Khaleesi, the Carl of all of the Dothraki nation, they are all her blood riders, they would do it. But why wouldn't she send them across the Dothraki Sea all the way over to somewhere on the west coast of Essos, and then she can just ferry them across that short bit of the narrow sea. That makes a huge amount more sense than trying to fit them all onto boats and then take them all the way around the south coast. So I think that's what's going to happen, is she is going to send the world's largest Khalasar westwards across the Dothraki Sea and say, you can meet us at, hey, where's the nearest point? Pentos. And that, I think, is what's going to happen. Then that is going to get mixed up with what has been promised to the Windblown and to the Tattered Prince. The Khalasar are going to come, sweep through Essos, end up in Pentos, and what's going to be left afterwards, the Tattered Prince will pick up. So that, I think, is what's going to be happening there. So yes, I think his story is going to play out. Question. Who said, somebody in here, Austin Flower, saying flea bottom done from the perspective of the fleas. Yes, that's the idea that we're going with here. This is very much from the grassroots upwards, rather than what we see of King's Landing most of the time in Song of Ice and Fire, and certainly on the show, was from the Red Keep looking downwards. This is from the bottom looking upwards. Question from Carlos Enrique, saying, not a Song of Ice and Fire related, but I'd love to see your opinion about Berserk, the manga. Please give it a chance. I don't know it, but thank you very much for the recommendation. I will try and keep an eye out for it. So at the moment, I have no views. Always open for recommendations, though. And question from Jibadol, saying, I consider this a valid question because he's from Volantis. What do you think will happen to Patchface? Yes, so, okay, I will allow it. So Patchface, I've covered Patchface, I think, when I was talking about the North and the Wall, or possibly about the Stormlands. He can get brought into any conversation. Patchface is attached to, the short version here is Patchface is attached to Shireen. He is very close to her. He follows her around. What's going to happen to Shireen? We know she's going to get burnt. Patchface is going to go ballistic, and he is going to get killed. There might be some unexpected magic-y thing going on there, which will prove or disprove what happens with him. But I do not think that he is long for this world. Let's not forget that Melisandre, who is the person who's going to be behind the burning of Shireen, she already fears and distrusts Patchface, so she will be wanting to get rid of him as well. So it would not surprise me if he gets killed at the same time as Shireen. Question from Auspicious Seahorse. Thank you very much. Very generous super chat. Thank you so much. Just saying thank you for all your great work. Love your channel. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's a very kind. Sifu Lukeli saying, love from South Africa. Would love to see you branch out into the Kingkiller Chronicles as you did Lord of the Rings. Love the channel. Dollar Rand exchange rate is just too much for me to Patreon, so sorry. Well, I just want to pick up on the Patreon thing. I entirely understand not everyone can do Patreon. Patrons, I always thank patrons every single time, because genuinely that their support is what allows me to devote as much time as I do to this. So that's why I always thank my patrons, but I completely understand why people cannot be patrons. What that means is that all of my content that I'm producing here, I'm always going to carry on producing stuff on YouTube. I've got stuff on podcasts, lots of stuff going on that is provided free. So I'm not trying to hide anything behind a paywall. That's the idea, is that I'm doing that, but hopefully providing some added value for my patrons. But thank you so much. As for the Kingkiller Chronicles, so great books. What I find just in terms of the audience here on YouTube is a lot higher for things that have got either films or TV associated with them, which the Kingkiller Chronicles do not yet. They are occasionally picked up. There was a rumor a couple of years ago that I can't remember who it was. Someone picked it up and then it got dropped. So it will probably happen at some point. I would like, as this channel develops, to be able to focus in more on some books that have not been developed for TV or film or anything like that. So yes, that's definitely on my longer term list as well, though. Question from Tobias Gulka, saying, thank you for keeping me company while screwing together furniture. Excellent. Do you think the inspiration for the Free Cities is a mix of the Italian city-states like Florence, the Bridge, and the Greek cities in Asia? Yes. I think that's certainly, there's a lot of that. Florence has got a fantastic but beautiful city. If you ever get the chance to go, there are so many wonderful cities in northern Italy, but Florence should definitely be on your list. The feel is of free cities who are, so these are city-states. This is the way that Western Essos tends to work, is that there is a city and then it has its hinterland over which it controls, and that hinterland kind of services the city. Now, that is, yes, this was the case in Greece as well as Italy, but it was also, when you go back into the Middle Ages, across a lot of Central Europe, that was the way they were. So what we now think of as Germany was a lot smaller, made up of a lot smaller states, and so the rise of the nation state is relatively recent in human history. Greece, similarly, classical Greece, you get the cities, each of which had their own hinterlands and the like. So that's the feel that George R. R. Martin is definitely going for. Yes, I do like the idea. So the sort of warring Italian city-states, this is very much the kind of, obviously we get Bravos, which has got the Venice vibes to it, and you get yes, I think Volantis, you could probably try and claim some kind of Florentine feel to it, but Rome obviously has some echoes across to Valyria. So there is, as with all things with George R. R. Martin, he takes inspiration from things, but it's not a like for like. So yes, if you find that a useful kind of analogy, then yeah, I definitely think that's something which was in his mind. Okay, question from Tyler Evan. Again, this was before we went live, saying Volantis's arrogance of Dany reminds me of Harren the Black's arrogance to Aegon. Will Volantis turn out to be the same as Harrenhal? I've got questions so I'm going to pick up on that, the latter bit there, a bit later, because I've got some very specific questions about that, and I've got an idea, I think, of what is going to happen. But in terms of the arrogance of Volantis, whether this is an echo of Harren the Black. Harren the Black was the person who built Harrenhal, which was the biggest, the mightiest castle in the land, and basically said, I'm safe in here. And then the dragon came across and burned it down, melted the very castle itself. Is there an echo here? Well, everything that Drogon does is an echo of some kind to Balerion the Black Dread. That we're supposed to think of them as being quite similar. So yes, there is Volantis. However, it's not an exact map across to Harren the Black, in my view. Yes, there are echoes of it, but what we seem to see is that the Volantines are the ones with the old blood, the ruling masters. They're actually a bit scared. they're actually a bit angry. They're not there just with their pride. Yes, they've got pride, but it's not just about that. They are actually genuinely a bit scared by the fact that Daenerys has just taken the cities that she wants in Slaver's Bay, that she's shut down huge chunks of the industry, which is the lifeblood of Volantis, the slave trade. So they are a bit scared. They're a bit angry. They want to stop it. And they are proactively trying to stop it, whereas Harren the Black basically just said, right, I'm here, come at me. So there's a slight different feel that's going on there between the two. Eric Ferg, thank you so much for the super chat, saying that there are extra questions on Patreon. Yes, I picked them up. Thank you. I will be coming to them very soon. Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super sticker. I hugely appreciate your support. Amara, Tootsbracken Leben Langer, saying, hi, Robert, watching live today while fighting policemen in the pouring rain on Route 212. I'm going to assume that's gaming rather than in real life, hoping for a fun stream, and we'll probably think of yet another slew of questions in time. Well, I shall look forward to your slew of questions, and I would say I hope you enjoy fighting the policeman, but that's the kind of thing which gets you demonetized on YouTube, so I didn't mean it, YouTube, but have fun with that. Carlito King asking, and I think I've got a question on Patreon this as well, asking why couldn't Robert's dad, that's Stefan Baratheon, find a wife for Rhaegar? I thought there was a lot of pure Valyrians there. Okay, this is a really interesting question. So this is a few years, I don't know, 2-3 years before Robert's Rebellion. Rhaegar is of the age where he should be getting married, producing heirs and all the rest of it. And Aerys II, at the time they hadn't got any daughter for him to marry. Obviously Daenerys came a lot later, but they didn't have another daughter for him to marry, so he couldn't marry into the Targaryens, as was their tradition. There weren't any Velaryons who were sort of suitable at the time. So what's next best? Well, if he wants to be keeping the Valyrian heritage going, then perhaps you go over to somewhere in the Free Cities, Volantis specifically, where there are people who are of the old blood who can trace their bloodline back to Old Valyria specifically, and they make sure, just like the Targaryens are very keen on understanding their own ancestry and bloodlines and all the rest of it, the Volantines, the ruling classes there, were absolutely assiduous about this. So Aerys II sent Robert Baratheon's father, Stefan Baratheon, over to Volantis saying, find a bride for Rhaegar, come back. There was, with that, and then they'll marry, great. There are lots of undercurrents here that this was during the build-up to the height of Aerys and Tywin Lannister's breakdown of trust. And the thought was, and again, we're told this through the World of Ice and Fire, so this is what the Maesters want us to hear. But the thought was that when Stefan returned triumphantly with a bride for Rhaegar, then that would be what would trigger Aerys to tell Tywin to go away, strip him of being Hand of the King, and make Stefan Hand of the King instead. But Stefan writes back, says, I can't find a wife for Rhaegar. I did find this fantastic fool, which was turned into Patchface, which will be great for Stannis, and then comes back and the ship gets caught in a storm and everyone dies. Patchface miraculously survives. But the question is, why didn't Stefan find a bride? And the short answer is, yeah, he could have done. Of course he could have done. He could have gone on to the other Free Cities if he was absolutely, definitely wanting to be finding a bride for Rhaegar. Then he would have found someone. The question is either, the options in my mind are either that he was given a very exacting list of requirements by Eris, which is entirely possible. That's what Eris was not of sound mind at the time, and it's entirely possible that he said, right, well, this person has to look like this, come from one of these families, be of these ages, whatever. And it is entirely possible that that list was so specific that Stefan just couldn't find somebody. That's option number one. Option number two is that Stefan didn't want to find someone, which obviously opens up a huge amount of intriguing possibilities. Why wouldn't he want to do that? Is it because he knew that if he came back, he would be made hand of the king and he didn't want to be hand of the king? It's possible. Is it because he was friends with Tywin as well? Did he want to help save Tywin? Again, it's possible. Was there some other deeper plot that we're unaware of? Again, it's possible. The fact is that this is one of those mysteries that is clearly a mystery, but we are not given enough information. We've literally only got 2 or 3 sentences a couple of different times from a couple of different perspectives, and that's it. We're not given enough information to draw a firm conclusion. So we have to just say it's either that he was given far too specific a list of criteria, or he did not want to, because there would be literally thousands of women in Volantis and in places like Lys, as well as across the Free Cities, that would have ancestry they could trace all the way back to Old Valyria. Literally thousands. So he could have found somebody if he was just given free rein to find someone. Smith Crazy, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, how do you think Volantis, thinking the Triarchs, and Bravos, the Sea Lords, views towards leadership or power and human rights changes compare? Are the other free cities mostly stuck in their ways, or do they adapt? Okay, good question. I think I will wrap this up, if that's okay, with actually the first question about what questions I've got later on about the free cities as a whole. But I'll say this now, which is that the free cities are not homogenous. They're not all the same. They are very different. And at a very high level, what you can probably break them down into a few different groups. You've got the first are the 3 up in the sort of the northeast. If you look at a map, you've got Cohort, Norvos, and Lorath. Those 3, each of them were set up as religious enclaves. They were people who broke free from the Valyrian freehold and wanted to have some kind of religious purity where they could set up their own community. And they were obviously still under the control and influence of the Valyrian freehold, but they had some religious freedom for themselves. Now, the extent to which that religion stayed in those cities did vary, but they've got a shared sort of history going on there. Then you get the 3 cities in the southwest, around the disputed lands, Tyrosh, Mir, and Lys. They are always at war with one another. This is called the disputed lands because this is the land between them, and they dispute it, and there's a never-ending war with sellsword companies and all the rest of it going on there. They were set up by, each of these were set up by the Valyrian freehold, and they have retained some sort of degree of independence, but being at war with one another in various configurations over a long period of time. Then you got in the northwest, you've got Bravos, who were never under the control of the Valyrian freehold. They were set up as independent, the slaves, free, not even freed slaves, slaves who broke free from their chains and set up their own city. And Pentos, which is similarly a trading city, and it has fought a number of wars recently with Bravos and lost the most recent one, and as a result has given up on slavery, although only technically. In reality, they're lots of debentured servants who effectively are living in slavery. And then you get Volantis, and it's worth thinking of Volantis as a separate place in and of itself. Volantis sees itself as the heir and successor to Valyria. That is what they are. They feel that they're better. They feel that certainly the city is larger. The people have got a greater concentration of people who can trace their ancestry back to Valyria. They control, just by way of a sort of context here, as they're traveling down to as Tyrion and co on the Shy Maid traveling down the River Royne towards Volantis, they come off. There's 3 cities that are there. Selhorys is one. There's a couple of others. Now Tyrion thinks Selhorys, this is bigger than King's Landing, but we don't think about it much because it's basically owned by Volantis. This is just part of this hinterland that I was talking about. Volantis is on an extra level. It is bigger, it is more massive. And so when we are talking about, which we will, Daenerys' attitude towards these other the free cities, actually Volantis is the biggest and most important out of all of those. Bravos is obviously important in its own way, but is a slightly different case. So in terms of the leadership power and human rights changes, then Bravos and Volantis, you could see them in many ways as being opposites, in that Volantis is specifically seeking to uphold its own position as being the heirs to Valyria. Bravos has been set up and has literally inscribed in stone the idea that it is opposed to what Valyria was about. They are freed slaves, or they're not freed slaves, they're slaves that freed themselves from Valyria. And the first law of Bravos, that no one shall ever be a slave in Bravos. So they are almost opposites in how they approach the world. But they, and almost opposites in many ways in terms of how they sometimes how they approach power. Bravos is all about gaining power through subtle means, through trade, through influence, through money, through the Iron Bank and things like that. Volantis, although it has for a while been ruled by the merchants, it's always happy, theoretically has been happy to be engaging in warfare. So yeah, think of them more like opposites. Question from, let me find it, David Benioff, not the David Benioff, I don't think, saying, can I just say thank you for all your great content? Thank you very much, David. A little Welsh flag there. So I'm assuming you're from not too far away. Nate Phipps saying, is it possible Bloodraven is behind Stefan's failure? Yes. If in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I didn't go down this because this route when I was talking about it a moment ago, because I'm very aware that I have to hold myself back from always blaming Bloodraven. But as I've been invited to, I shall go down this route. Whose interests is it for Rhaegar not to be marrying into some random family over in Valyria? Bloodraven, as we know, has, or if we don't know, then I would love you to watch my videos on the subject, which argue that he spent decades just doing manipulation of the Targaryen family tree to make sure it is exactly right, the exact magical mix that he wants. Now, when I say manipulation of the Targaryen family tree, he killed lots of Targaryens himself, particularly the Blackfires, who may have had a different name, but they were Targaryen. Lots of suspicious deaths. The Woods Witch telling them who they should marry, who was clearly working for him. He was trying to manipulate who Rhaegar was going to have children with. And so does that mean that Bloodraven is therefore a suspect in this? I think he definitely has to be a suspect in this. He will have worked out what he wants for Rhaegar, and I think marrying a random person from Volantis probably wasn't it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to follow my own tinfoil. Very much appreciate that. Totesblack and Laban Langer, you did promise some more questions. How come that Lys became so important and such a rival to Tyrosh and Myr? Looking at the map, it seems to be located on a fairly out-of-the-way island. Yes, but it's not just about the map. So basically, Lys was the Valyrians' pleasure island. That's what it was. So the Valyrians went on holiday there. So if you were in Valyria, you were a dragon rider, you just wanted to get away from the heat of the city, you just wanted to relax, you want to just go on a beach somewhere, have a whole load of beautiful slaves tending to your every possible need, then you go to Lys. That is what it was. And so when the Doom of Valyria happened, there were some Valyrians on Lys with their dragons, we're told, and the people of Lys all jumped up and cut them down, but it shows that this was the place for them to be going. There weren't many Valyrians just randomly elsewhere in the world. There was one in Cohort, I think, but most of them were just settled in Valyria itself. So this was their go-to place. Think in English history back in the day, Bath, this is where people would go out from London, or more recently Brighton, is the sort of where the London set head off to get some rest and relaxation. So that is why it was, and that meant that, frankly, there was a lot of money there. There was also a huge amount of very specialist slaves in the art of love, shall we say. And so that is how they managed to get their specific place and the power and influence that they did, even though, yes, they were on a little island by themselves. Totesbacken Leben Langer saying, imagine a European empire controlled from Fuerteventura. Yes, so this is which actually, thank you, this takes me to a point which is really important to understand when it comes to Essos. Essos is massive. This is not like Westeros. And when we talk about Westeros, we always talk about how long it takes to get from the north down to King's Landing and all the rest of it. You can multiply that several times over when you're talking about Essos. This is huge. Getting from one place to another takes a huge amount of time. So what you have with the Valyrian Empire is it wasn't an empire. This is partly why it was a freehold, because it was so widespread. But also, it could only really be ruled by people who could get from one place to another very quickly on, say, dragons. So this is one of the key distinctives of Essos, is its huge size. think that's me caught up on questions in the chat. I'll pop back in there in a moment. I want to get to some questions from my patrons. Mara Lee saying, Robert, can you give us some more detail pardon me, about the current political structure of Volantis as well as its two major political parties? Very happy to. So Volantis, as I've said, this saw itself as being the heir to Valyria. Now, it was called the first daughter of Valyria. This was their first outpost. So we get the Black Walls, which is this huge, very famous wall. So it's basically a walled city. That was what it started off as. This, and it's made from the fused black stone, which we see dotted around Essos in particular, but also a bit of a few places in Westeros. That was the start of it, and then the city sort of expanded out from there. So when we're talking about Volantis thinks of themselves as being, actually what we're doing is we're talking about the ruling elite. Volantis is a huge city. We don't get an exact count, but certainly over 1 million people live there, and all the things we're told about the size is massive. We hear about the temple to R'hllor there. We're told it's 3 times the size of the Great Sept of Baelor. This is huge, and so the culture there is very much a two halves culture. You get the ruling elite and then you get everyone else. Now, there are huge amounts of slaves. There are more slaves than freed people, but there's a sort of the middle class of freed men and freed women, and then you get the elites who can trace their bloodline back to old Valyria, and they are, they don't touch the ground. They carried around everywhere on palanquins on the back of elephants. That they're above and everything around them, which creates a very, very divided city. It is figuratively shown by having two halves: the eastern side of the river, which is where the Black Walls are, and the western side of the river, connected by what's called the Long Bridge, which is this definitely inspired by the old London Bridge, which, if you've probably seen pictures of it, had buildings built up right on both sides, and then you would go down the middle and there'd be people selling you stuff. There'd be stalls. It would be jostling your way past people just to sort of move across, and this was one of the wonders of the world. So that's the context, and within that it is ruled. You talk about the two political parties. It is ruled by those of the old blood, which are the people who can trace their ancestry back to old Valyria. They're the people who get the right to vote for 3 triarchs. This happens on a yearly basis. You can stay on for more than 1 year, but this happens on an annual basis. 3 triarchs are voted in by this incredibly small group of electors, and they rule the city. And there are two political parties: the elephants and the tigers. The elephants are those who believe in trade and peace, and the tigers are those who believe in war and expansion. And for the last long time, 300 years, it has always been at least 2 elephants to 1 tiger. The let's live in peace and trade with people group have been in the ascendancy. That is that does not mean that there is not a significant group of people within Volantis who want war, and indeed where we get to in the story is they launch a huge fleet heading over to Slaver's Bay. And you followed this up by saying only those of the old blood of Valyria get to live behind its black walls. Are these people then the only ones who can govern as triarchs if elected, or are there any other Volantines who could do so? Both women and men can be elected as triarchs, but there hasn't been an elected female triarch for 300 years. Why do you think this is so? So yes, in answer to the first bit, yes, the only people who can be triarchs are those of the old blood. There's, in fact, we get a character complaining about it in A Song of Ice and Fire, that no matter how wise or wealthy a merchant class person is, they can't ever be in power. It's only ever held by that. Power is only ever held by that small ruling cabal. Now, in terms of women, yes, women can vote, but we're told some women can vote. So clear implication is that the vast majority of the electors are male, and yes, they will be electing their own. And there's one thing to say, that, and you can apply this however you wish in the world, but it's just the way that these things work. Is it's one thing to say anyone can be elected, and it's another thing to acknowledge, actually, you know what, those people perhaps can't, because only a very small number of women are the electors. Therefore, only a small amount of people could possibly put themselves forward, and they would only potentially get the votes of those small number of electors. And if maybe we're not training people up with the expectation that they would be potential triarchs in the future, aspirations are very important in these kinds of things. So that's why you get the situation that you've got there. You could, in today's language, we might talk, and it's probably underplaying it quite a lot. Institutionalized patriarchy is what is going on in Volantis, is probably the best way of answering that as to why there aren't more women who've been triarchs. It's that the system works against them. Yul Elson, thank you so much for the super sticker. And question from Tootsflecken Leben Langer, thank you. Picking up something for Caroline Schween, saying, please discuss the likely role of the Widow of the Waterfront in the Winds of Winter. She would be a dangerous ally and capitalize on Dany's invasion. Yeah, this is the character that I was mentioning a moment ago, who complains about the fact that women aren't likely to, or even those not of the old blood are not likely to be ever be able to cannot rule. She is a character that we meet through Tyrion's eyes in Volantis. At this point, he's been captured by Ser Jorah, and Jorah's trying to get them onto a ship going across to Slaver's Bay. His cunning plan is he gets Tyrion, and he presents Tyrion to Dany, and maybe this will be a way to get back into her good graces. So that's what he's about. And we meet the Widow of the Waterfront, who is sort of this character hiding in this. Hiding is probably the wrong word, but in this inn on the western part of Fisherman's Square, which is on the western part of the city, so away from the Black Walls. And she is there sitting in a corner of the common room of the pub, and just sort of people are coming to her, and she's effectively holding court there. And it becomes apparent as we see this through Tyrion's eyes that actually she's got a huge amount of power over what is happening in the city. She knows what's going on. She can influence things, but she is technically not allowed to be in power at all. So the question being, what role might she play? Yes, so I will get on in just a couple of questions time. I'll get on to what I think will happen, but I think that Dany's actions are going to be focused very much on the eastern side of the city, and we have to say who is going to be stepping in afterwards, and who is going to be advising Dany at this point. Probably Tyrion. And possibly Jorah, and they have both met the Widow of the Waterfront. So yeah, there's a fair chance that she may well not just step in to try and fill in the power vacuum, but also be encouraged to do so and enabled to do so. One thing that Dany thinks about a lot when she's in Meereen is how after she left the first two cities that she invaded, Yunkai and Astapor, they basically went back to their old ways almost straight away. And she thinks, what could she have done differently? How could she change things? So she is clearly interested in lasting change, not just invading for invading's sake. So she will be trying to think about succession planning. Once, if she comes in and does things in Volantis, what happens after she's gone? Reflective Rambling asking the same question actually for Karen. Thank you so much, Reflective Rambling, and also to Expecting Lemon Langer for picking that up. It was a great question. So yeah, I mean, she would be a dangerous ally, but I think in the high level, I think the other thing that I would add on this, at a high level, this story is going to be the second half of the story in the Winds of Winter for Dany and Tyrion is about the momentum moving across to Westeros. She's wanting to get to Westeros now. Yes, there are things that she needs to deal with on the way, but she is not going to get distracted. So she's going to come in, do what she wants to do, and then move on. We will get 1-2 chapters with Volantis and then move on. We're not going to get huge amounts of detailed work on what's happening in and around and all the rest of it. She will make sure that there's something in place after she's gone, and then that will be it. Question from Juliano Alano or Giuliano. Thank you so much, saying, why are cities so big in Essos? It seems like any small village there is 3 times the size of Old Town. Yeah, I think this is a geography issue in Essos. Now, I said the first thing you have to understand about Essos is quite how massive it is. So there's lots of space. But the second thing you have to understand is that not much of that is livable in. If you imagine a map of Essos, a huge, forgetting the stuff on sort of the eastern edge for a moment, sort of the Yetis and the Shies of this world, because we'll come on to them in another live stream. But if you imagine looking at it, the huge swathe across the middle part of Essos is the Dothraki Sea. And there were cities there. There were lots of townships there. But they got destroyed by the Dothraki. So all of the villages and things there have been destroyed. The only things which have survived have been bigger cities that could defend themselves, like Cohort, like Pentos, like Norvos. Now, when I say defend themselves, you either buy yourself Unsullied to guard your city, which some choose to do, or you pay off the Dothraki, which means you have to have a lot of money. That's what places like Pentos do, for example. Now, what that means is that for the vast swathe across the center of Essos, the geography and the existence of the Dothraki has meant that the smaller settlements have disappeared, and all that is left are the bigger, more defendable ones. So that's the first point. The second point is that the rest of it is actually largely arid. You've got the Red Waste heading all the way over towards Karth. There were some cities there and some settlements. Dany comes across a couple of them when she's heading over there, but they've gone. The climate does not support them. And there's lots of mountain ranges heading right across the southern parts of Essos as well. So when you then look at the map, what is left? The cities on rivers or on the coast. And when we're talking about the free cities, it's noticeable that with the exception of Cohort and Norvos, they're all on the coast in one way or another. So that it's the geography that has pushed people to where the conditions for living are good and right, and also the Dothraki have destroyed a huge amount of the smaller cities, and people have assembled themselves into larger settlements to defend themselves. Standard Tom. Out of Volantis and all the free cities, which would be your preferred holiday destination? Not Volantis. I mean, I would love to visit Volantis because it looks amazing, but when you read it again, Tyrion's observations are fantastic. He says it's stupidly hot and it stinks. So that doesn't sound like a good place to go. Braavos I would find absolutely fascinating, but of the other ones, the one that sounds nicest is Lys, simply because it was built as a pleasure island, so that would be the place to go. But if you don't want slaves, the only place really to go is Braavos. So I think it has to be Braavos. Rory Bradley, thank you so much. Is that a super sticker of a little dog, I think? Thank you very much. Derry saying in Deep Geek, Widow of the Waterfront is also an ex-slave. Yeah, so the Dany's approach is will very much be about slavery or ending it. Gabriel Cardoso saying greetings from Brazil. Hi there. Do you think Cohort may have some importance in history? It is the free city that I find most interesting. Yeah, so I'll talk about Cohort for a little bit more. And I will wrap this up with, I did get one question from a patron about Cohort. Let's see if I can find it. No, I can't find it immediately. Catherine Furseth saying, hi, Robert. Sorry for a rather late question, but had to drive an 800-mile round trip in order to get my COVID vaccine for the past 2 days. Well, Catherine, I'm glad you have made it back. That's a mighty trip, 800 miles. But I'm glad that you got your vaccine. This is excellent news. I'm interested in Cohort and the Eastern mysterious culture it seems to have involving blood sacrifice and dark arts. Could you please say a bit more about this culture and how it was affected by the city's geographical position? Thanks. So Cohort is, I agree, a fascinating city. It's a city that we don't know huge amounts about, it has to be said. And it's a mysterious city because it's called the City of Sorcerers. And it is the gateway to the east. So this is the easternmost of the free cities. And it's the route that you go if you were heading off eastwards to go all the way, Vace Dothrak and as far as Yee or wherever, you would go through Cohort and head off that way. Its situation is in the forest, Cohori forest, so that has allowed it some degree of seclusion, and has also meant that there's a lot of woodwork going on there. So Cohori wood they've got export. They just chop down trees and then send them down the river to places like Volantis. But the fascinating thing about this is the ideas of sorcery. It's a bit like a Shy with all the rumors that you have there, but slightly closer to home. More people have been to Cohort. Now, Cohort is, for one random example, this is where the secret to how to make Valyrian steel has been remembered. Tobbo Mott, the guy in King's Landing who can do Valyrian steel, he comes from Cohort. And so it uses magic. It's just the spells Tobo Mott talks about the spells. So this is magic that they're doing there. They have this religion called the Black Goat, which is known as the Black Goat of Cohort because it's not really worshipped anywhere else. Yes, there's some evidence in Bravos because Bravos is such a cosmopolitan city, but it is a Cohori religion. That is a religion that calls for blood sacrifice, animals every day on festivals, then convicted criminals and the like, if they want to be pleading to the gods to be saving them, or the Black Goat to save them, then perhaps some highborn children or something like that. It sounds horrific. We get characters like Vargo Hoot, who's in the Brave Companions, who's a horrible character. He comes from there. So it's mysterious, it's dark, and we don't know huge amounts about it. What we hear are the rumors that R'hllor is there and strong there and have been trying to overthrow the Black Goat as a religion in there. I think in terms of history, its role is remembering a lot of the magic from Old Valyria. That is its role in history. It, like I said with Pentos, it tends to pay off the Dothraki so they don't attack it. And in terms of its role in the future, we probably won't see it again. It's possible, if what I suggested might happen with the Dothraki heading west over to Pentos, it's possible that they might pass by Cohort, and it's possible that if this is all of the Dothraki, that they might decide just to wipe it out. They've done it to other cities in the past. Why not there? So it's possible, and this would build up this idea of an unstoppable force working. The Dothraki at the moment, we keep on hearing about how amazing they are, but we haven't yet seen them. And if they destroy cities, actual cities that we've been to or heard of, then that would build up their reputation even more. And question from Chris and Sarah saying greetings from Korea. Hi. None of my ridiculous questions. You don't ask ridiculous questions. None of my ridiculous questions today. Just wishing you a good weekend. Thank you very much indeed. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Let me dip back into the questions from my patrons. And actually, while I'm at it, I will do what I do every time. Patrons, thank you. I sort of mentioned patrons earlier. If you want to support this channel, if you want to get access to some of the things I do exclusively for my patrons, there's a new benefit I'm going to be talking about in about a week's time, patrons, so keep an eye out for that. And obviously priority questions here for live streams. There is a link down in the description if you are interested in that at all. But patrons, thank you very much. Where was I at? So let's go back to Volantis for a moment. Eric Ferg says, what dictates that the Fiery Hand must always have 1,000 members? Is it a limit from the Tigers to prevent their military authority being rivaled? Okay, so the Fiery Hand are the military arm of the worshippers of R'hllor. They are based at the Great Temple of R'hllor in Volantis, and they are slaves. So many of these people within the worship of R'hllor are slaves that are then trained to be guards and fighters. Now, we're not told huge amounts about them, but we are told that the number is limited to 1,000. The question is whether this is a limit set by the powers that be in Volantis. We're not told. My instinct is probably not. 1,000 is quite a clever number in a way, and it seems about the right sort of number, because if you're wanting a temple guard, if you go, it is a substantial number. 1,000 is a substantial number. If this is a huge temple, and clearly people are getting whipped up into a frenzy, you do need to have security. So yes, you need to have a sizable force, but anything more than 1,000 feels like it's approaching an army. And we should clarify, the Temple of R'hllor is literally outside the Black Walls. Literally just there, you can see the Black Walls from it. And so the Volantines inside the Black Walls, they look down on it. They're getting nervous because they can see people being whipped up into a frenzy down there. If there were more than 1,000, I suspect that would get clamped down on. 1,000 does not feel like it's an actual threat yet. So I think it's a well-chosen number. I don't think it was an imposed number, but I think it was a well-chosen number. James Sledge saying, my question is more of a prompt to ruminate. I am endlessly intrigued by the unique objects and places that Martin drops throughout his world. They give a real sense of wonder, mystery, history, and depth to the fiction. I agree. In Volantis, we have the Long Bridge, the Black Wall, and the Headless Statue, for example. I'm interested in hearing you share your thoughts and conjecture about these features of Volantis, and in particular, I'm curious if you think there's anything thematically resonant in other parts of the fictional world with the Headless Statues. Do you see that as being connected to any other legends or places in Planetos at all? They strike me as marvelously creepy, personally. Right, so the Headless Statue we're talking about is this one. It's in Fisherman's Square, which is on the western half, and it's this statue of someone on a horse, one of the old triarchs, and his head has been lopped off. And it's apparently been there a long time. Now, this is marvelously creepy. I think this is actually the kind of thing that certainly in Europe is a lot more immediately instinctively understandable than perhaps in North America, because there is a history of this certainly in my country, and I know in many others, and probably further afield too, although I haven't seen it but myself. This is what you do, is if there's a change of the guard, if you're wishing to show you're going away with the old things, then you lop off the head of a statue. This is when Henry VIII was dissolving the monasteries in this country. Lots of statues just had their heads lopped off. And that was just a thing that you get, and so you're left with a statue without a head. Yes, this is incredibly creepy. What George R.R. Martin, I think, is trying to do there is to show that this is an ancient city. This is a city that ebbs and flows and has changes in its political makeup. Now, that I think is important, because we're told, oh, the elephants have been in control for hundreds of years, and they're all about trade and all the rest of it. But that shows that these things can and do change. That if you have a statue that's head been lopped off, it's shown that that person is no longer in vogue. We do not wish to remember them. They're out of here. We've got new people we now wish to be remembering. So that, I think, is the point he's trying to be making. Is it's a very Volantis specific point, is that do not think that they're not going to change. They might have been all about trade and peace for a little while, but things can change very, very quickly. So I think that's what it is. In terms of more widely, statues, yes, they're all over the place. George R.R. Martin is telling us about statues more than you would expect, even for the story set in the kind of world it is. Statues appear all over the place. The Titan of Bravos, Winterfell crypts, the Dragonstone statues of dragons, the Long Bridge has got statues of manticores and goodness knows what else on them. Outside the Red Keep, you get I think there are two sphinxes. Their statues are absolutely everywhere in this world, and that, I think, is very important. And also the great sickness that we have with grayscale, with the stone men, walking, living, breathing statues, rumors and legends of statues coming to life. This is building to something. You may or may not buy into my theory that this is building up to the statues in Winterfell crypts coming to life, but it's building to something, definitely. Eric Fogg asking, what does the temple in Volantis do with all the slave prostitutes? Do they serve some role in the worship of the Red God, or is it just a fundraising operation? Yeah, so there's, again, this is a thing that we're told about in passing. We're not given chapter and verse on the whys and wherefores, but there are definitely temple prostitutes. In Volantis at the Red Temple, and also in other temples of R'hllor across, certainly across Essos. So, do they serve some purpose, or is it just a money-making thing? Well, I think it definitely is a money-making thing. I think another thing to say is that this does appear to be a common-ish thing in Essos, not restricted just to the worship of R'hllor. If you go over to Meereen, for example, then you'll find the Graces, Temple of the Graces, they have temple prostitutes. This was a thing back in ancient history, so George R. R. Martin, again, he's borrowing from it, and there is almost always some element of worship involved in some way. Now, we don't see many priests of R'hllor firsthand in this story. We've only had 3 that we've had any sort of particular firsthand contact with: Melisandre, Thoros of Myr, and Moqorro. And so we can't say for certain everything that to do with the practices of the religion. Melisandre, though, it does have to be said, a lot of her magic does seem to be kind of, let's say, sexually charged in some way, with Stannis, with I'd say Gendry on the TV show, Edric on when we get to the books, that there's an underlying current giving birth to shadow babies. There's a sort of a sexuality element to it that Melisandre certainly brings there. So I suspect that there is something going on. We just haven't been told all of the details of it. But that's a deeper layer than the fact that this is just commonplace in lots of different temples, and yes, it probably does raise some funds. Johnny Giant's Bane saying, greetings from the lands of always winter. I listened to your traveler's guide to Volantis earlier as I needed a reminder. The Free Cities are definitely an area I recall the least about. Could you remind us of the slave culture, facial markings, and thoughts on a potential uprising when Dany rolls into town? Yeah, so this is a lead into the what is going to happen with Dany. So Dany will roll into town, but the slave markings first. This is a practice in Volantis, but also more widely, that the slaves are tattooed on their face, but also sometimes on the rest of their body, something to show what they're a slave of, what they've been given over to. So slaves of R'hllor have flames tattooed on them. If you are sweeping up the dung from, which is a big thing in Volantis because you get elephants wandering the streets. If there are many slaves who just like picking up the dung and getting rid of it, then you have flies tattooed onto your face. Patch Face, for example, is called Patch Face because he literally has patch faces tattooed onto his face because he was trained as a jester, and so on. All the different trades that you are. I mean, you can be a generic slave, but often, particularly in Volantis, you were trained to be a slave of a specific type. you were an expert in that particular thing. So that is what the markings are for, and it's to show not just what type, but the fact that you are a slave, and so you can never ever try to escape from it, because that's it. You're marked for life now. It's not a thing that there's a chance, a route out, that maybe you can hope to not be a slave one day. People will always know that you were a slave. Now, you were asking about thoughts on a potential uprising when Dany rolls into town. And I've got some more questions which build on this. So I will start by saying that Volantis is not a calm city at this point in time. When we see Tyrion in Volantis and they stop at the him and Jorah, they stop and they look at the great temple of R'hllor, and Benero, the high priest, is preaching, and he is whipping up. There are huge crowds of people there listening to him. He's standing atop this huge pillar, fire and brimstone, talking about the end of the world, apocalyptic stuff. He's talking about heroes with fiery swords, comets trailing blood and fire. He's talking about the climactic battle between R'hllor and the Great Other. He's talking about Armageddon, effectively, and the people are being whipped up into a frenzy. And Tyrion thinks that the feel of it reminds him of the atmosphere in King's Landing just before there was a riot. And that's the feeling he's got. And this is happening on a daily basis. The people are being whipped up into action. The feel that we're getting here is a city that is on a knife edge. The slaves out there, we're told again and again when we go to all these different cities where it's described the slaves outnumber the free people by X to 1. Volantis is the same. There are more slaves than there are the masters, and they are being whipped up into a state of not just righteous indignation at what's happening to them, but also this feeling that the end of the world is nigh. They have to throw absolutely everything into supporting the righteousness of R'hllor. So that is where we're at. This kind of feel, if you imagine a fire and brimstone preacher back in the Middle Ages whipping up the crowds, that's the kind of feel that we've got going on here. So that is what Dany is going to arrive into when she comes back to Volantis. Mrs. Castle Dreams says, hey Robert, Volantis is the home of many slaves of the Red Fire God. Many of the Red Priests claim Dany to be Azor Ahai. The Red God is so steeped in slavery, how can Dany accept their worship? What is your opinion of how Dany will handle this? Will she go to Volantis before Westeros? Will she free the R'hllor slaves? Thanks for all the great content. Well, you're welcome for the content. In terms of how she will interrelate with the slaves, so they're not going to be worshipping her. They're going to see her as this long prophesied champion. Benero sent Moqorro off to find her, to get her, to support her, because they've identified her as being this champion. She is Azor Ahai reborn. That's what they think. When she comes back to Volantis and she discovers that there are lots of slaves, I think she'll just announce, as she did in Slaver's Bay, she'll just say, all slaves are free. And that's it. So suddenly you get this, all of the people who have been slaves to R'hllor will no longer be slaves. But they have been so bought into this that won't actually make any difference to what they do. But the fact that Melisandre was originally a slave hasn't in the slightest bit affected her own personal zeal for R'hllor. And that, I think, is going to be the case for a huge majority of the followers of R'hllor in Volantis. They will be freed, but it won't make huge amounts of difference to their belief in R'hllor and their belief in what Dany must do in the face of Armageddon, effectively. Eric Ferg saying Volantis seems primed to be Harrenhal 2.0, at least inside the Black Walls. How do you suppose the fused stone will react to dragonfire, since it was made from that? It could operate like an oven, and there is plenty of kindling inside the walls. Alternatively, the Black Walls are extraordinarily wide up high, so perhaps escaping slaves will hide there while everyone inside is bathed in flame. And following up, you also say, how do you anticipate the slave escape operating? Will the enormous long bridge hold most of them? Will the widow of the Waterfront coordinate with the high priest? So this is what I think at a high level is going to happen. Dany is going to arrive back. So first of all, the Volantine fleet is heading over to Slaver's Bay. When they get there, then there will be a battle, but Dany will come back and she will destroy any ships with Drogon. When she and her armada head west and they get to Volantis, then we're going to have the Lords of Volantis. You say Harrenhal 2.0. I tried to tease out some of the ways it's different to that, but at this point in the narrative, I think that there will indeed be a similarity. I think that they will hide inside their Black Walls, which they probably quite rightly think that will defend them from anything. And I think that she will just go, okay, so you can't attack it from the side, but from above, we can get this. And I think that she will rain fire down inside the Black Walls, and we are going to get this visual, which would have looked amazing on TV, it has to be said, but this visual of the Black Walls and then the flame burning up from inside. And that is what we saw in the in the Temple of R'hllor. Their walls were painted like fire. And this, I think, is, we always talk about George R. R. Martin's foreshadowing, and that being just outside the Black Walls of Volantis. And I think that is what we're going to see, is the inside being burned. How will the slaves escape? Yes, I imagine many of them will escape out over the Long Bridge and all the rest of it. But I think we're going to see with Daenerys, she is focused more and more on getting to Westeros. And we will see increasingly that when she takes, when she goes on the offensive, it is more about fire and blood, and it is less defendable when she attacks a place, a city. What I mean by that is that, and I think they tried to show this on the show, but they didn't really do it, I think, particularly well. But when she starts out on her sort of fire and blood journey, then what does she first burn? It's the House of the Undying. They were trying to capture and kill her and take her dragon. They're particularly seedy and nasty looking people. Of course, we're entirely understanding of her burning that down. That kind of makes sense. Then we get Astapor, and she takes the city and attacks, all of the masters, all of the slave owners can be killed. We get that. Again, we can be sympathetic. They're slave owners. We shouldn't have huge amounts of sympathy for them. But she says anyone over the age of 12. So all the 13-year-olds who happen to be born into those families get killed as well. Does that sound fair? Well, maybe we've got a little bit less sympathy for her now. Each time she then moves on to another place, when she gets up to Meereen, and she crucifies hundreds or dozens of Meereenese nobles, some of whom were actually actively working against slavery. And we go, okay, we understand the whole point of what she's trying to do, and this was in response to a similar atrocity which they had previously done, but she doesn't seem to be particularly discriminating here. And that lack of discrimination, it seems, is growing every time she comes to a new city. In Astapor, she burns inside the Black Walls, say. Yes, that will kill all of the masters and slave owners, but there will be slaves inside those Black Walls. They won't all be able to come out. She will move around, and each time she's moving around to a new place, we'll find it slightly harder to defend what she does. And Tyrion, this is who we're going to be seeing a lot of this through his eyes, he will be finding it increasingly hard to justify it. So that's the sort of the arc that I can see going on here. And yeah, a lot of people talk about the Widow of the Waterfront. Eric, yeah, I agree. I think that she will probably be the person that they turn to tidy up the mess afterwards, and then they move on. Morally saying, what role do you see the Order of the Fiery Hand play in the last two books? Do you think they'll play a hand in fighting the others? I was disappointed that Melisandre did not bring the Fiery Hand back to help in the battle with the Night King and the others on the show. Yeah, I think a lot of people were disappointed in that. She went away and then just sort of returned, and it was just her. I actually thought the visual of that bit of her just coming out of the night was very good. But in the books, the Fiery Hand, as we've already said, there are 1,000. It's not an army. The biggest, most important point here is that this is an army of the people under R'hllor, and they will definitely be following Dany. Melisandre, we have to keep on reminding ourselves, she's a rogue priest. She was not sent to Stannis. Thoros of Myr was sent by the powers that be to go and try and convert the king of Westeros. She wasn't. She took it upon herself to go off and follow the clues that she thinks that she found, and decided that Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn. That is not the prevailing view among the Red Priests of R'hllor. Their view is that it is Daenerys. So we're going to have a bit of at some point, a confrontation between Melisandre and the central powers of the religion of R'hllor. Now, in terms of the Fiery Hand, they may well come across to Westeros, and they may well be involved in the fight in the north, but they're not there for Melisandre. They will be following the army that Daenerys is taking across, and they will be the people along. Just Jon coming down, I'm sure, will have a role in persuading her to be looking to the north, but also she is going to have the priests of R'hllor always constantly telling her to be looking to the north as well. Okay, so that was the questions I had on Volantis specifically. I've got some more questions now, more broadly on the free cities. Maester Mansa saying, hi Robert, happy Easter to you too. I was hoping that you could discuss the different nature of Essos and Westeros. I seem to imagine Essos as having a few massive cities but not a lot of small towns. Since it doesn't have kingdoms in the same way, I'm guessing that there isn't the same structure of wardens, liege lords, etc. as in Westeros. I'm picturing a bunch of wealthy landowners who have slave plantations but not a lot of towns. Is this accurate? Was it just because of the Valyrian heritage? Yeah, I've built up to this in a couple of previous answers, so I'll just sort of pick up from where I was. The fact that we've got a few large cities is because of geography and because of the Dothrakis. But in those cities, the way that they are set up is largely a result of how they were under the Valyrian freehold, and therefore how that has emerged afterwards. So the Bravos is not a matter of lots of wealthy landowners. Yes, there are some rich families who own big palaces, but it's not a land empire in Braavos, and the people who the Sea Lord may be in charge, but it is the people with power is lots of people across the city, the key holders and the like. So there is a lot more egalitarian in its approach. A lot of the cities along the west coast have these kind of councils of magisters, which are often an echo of what there was before with the Valyrian freehold. And then the three, Lorath, Cohort, and Norvos, have varying degrees of theocracy. Now, Norvos has a complete theocracy. I think I'll talk about that in a moment. I think I've got a question about it in a moment, but that is an absolute theocracy. Cohort seems to be highly influenced by religion, but that's not the main leadership. And then Lorath was very religious and is now less so. So what we have though in is, taking Pentos as an example, you have your wealthy people, magisters in the cities, and then yes, they own land outside those cities as well. That seems to be the way that this kind of operates. So you get Illyrio, for example, has got his manse, which is a huge, basically he's got a huge section of the city which he's walled off for him, and outside of the city he's got other lands as well. So that is the way this sort of tends to work across the piece. But in Volantis, say, then they are a lot more empire driven in terms of they are managing the other cities further up the Rhoyne. Jaharis Stargithista, thank you very much for the super chat, saying, yay, I caught a live stream. What significance could Lady Nim and possibly her council appointment play into Dany's Volantine occupation, if any? So this is Nim, Nymeria, who is one of the Sand Snakes, who is taking up a place in the small council, in theory at least. Her mother was from Lys, I think. My take is that the Martel plans are now very focused in on Westeros. That's what's where we should be looking. They're going to be shifting their focus from Dany across to the Aegon the VI, and the two Sand Snakes who have headed into King's Landing. They are not going to be staying there for huge amounts of time as part of a Lannister-led small council. They are going to hang around there when Cersei leaves, and they will join the small council for Aegon when he arrives. Now, the shift from Daenerys, if you've not caught the logic before, is that Quentin Martel is dead. Forget the naysayers. There's literally zero evidence that he's still alive. Quentin is dead. Barristan is sending the body back, or the bones back, and he'll sort of send with it a note that said, okay, so your son and heir did make it all the way over to Daenerys. He did propose marriage. She rejected it. He's now dead, and Daenerys has now disappeared. So what's Doran Martell going to do? Is he going to say, okay, that's fine, we'll try another way of getting with Daenerys? No. There's somebody already on his doorstep, another Targaryen, who is already successfully invading. He will then try and hitch his wagon to Aegon and what's going on over there. His plan is always to marry Martells into Targaryens, and so that is what he's going to be doing. So there we're looking at the Martels tying themselves in with Phagon and abandoning Dany, which means that they will be on opposite sides when Dany does arrive. Question from Shasha. The Valyrian Freehold, I believe, and Shasha, I'll just say, yeah, you put a few extra questions over on Patreon. Just trying, in the interests of time, the Bravos ones I won't answer this time because I did Bravos last week, if that's okay. But obviously very happy to answer about the Free Cities. The Valyrian Freehold, says Shar, saying, I believe, likes to think of itself as egalitarian and tolerant, specifically towards religion, and also because they had no king or emperor. In reality, of course, it was an oligarchy, giving power only to select wealthy people, landowners and dragon riders, I think. The Free Cities seems to have inherited that thought, none of them actually being governed by a true monarch. However, only Bravos and Pentos are clear in my mind in that regard. Could you elaborate on the government of the other cities? Does the oligarchical pattern hold for all of them? So yeah, I think I've covered most of this bit already, but yes, all of the Free Cities are run in some sort of oligarchy, in the sense that it's not just one overall ruler who's in charge of everything, which is different to the more feudal system that they have over in Westeros. As I say, you get some of them. Norvos is a proper theocracy. It's run that there are three, but the bells are three bells of Melisandre. They are rung. They each have a different chime. They've got a different name, and they govern everyone's day. When you get up, when you go to sleep, when you eat, by these bells which resound across the whole city. And the priests are in charge of it all. So that is a theocracy rather than an oligarchy. But certainly, when you look at Pentos and when you look at Bravos, and the three disputing sisters down around the disputed lands, they're definitely much more of an oligarchy. Volantis, you could argue, also is. It's a small group of electors, which, yeah, you could argue. Okay, certainly they have not gone for the king or emperor route that other parts of Planetos have done. Christian Shasha followed that up with, despite Valyria's aforementioned egalitarian caste, at least two of the Free Cities have their origin in a schism in Valyrian culture, striving to create a more egalitarian culture. Bravos and Lorath, which was founded by the priests of Boash. Does this hold true for the other cities as well? They didn't control Bravos, but what did they leave the other cities why did they leave the other cities to govern themselves? That's quite severely cut into their authority. Well, this was, as I say, the Valyrian freehold was a huge landmass. The thing, once you've got dragons, is you don't actually need to be there all the time. Just the threat of dragons is enough to keep people in line. So they didn't need to be ruling, having somebody sitting there with a throne in each of their individual cities. They just needed people to know that if they crossed the Valyrians, then the dragons would come and burn down their city. So they didn't need to, because they had such overwhelming power. And that did, yes, play in perhaps to a more oligarchical, or you say egalitarian, I think that's probably pushing it a little too far, approach in the Free Cities. Bravos is different to the others because Bravos was never ruled or overseen by Valyria in any way. Indeed, its entire history, and the point of it is that it's set up as the opposite to it. And then the other question from Shashar: Daenerys will probably spend most of her time in the Winds of Winter on her way to Westeros, and likely stop in multiple Free Cities. Where exactly will she stop, and how will these cities be affected by her visit? How much of that will stick after her leaving and after her death? I'm particularly interested in Pentos, which seems to be being promised to tatters. Okay, so this is my sort of high-level take on what's Daenerys' journey. So I've already said I think that the Dothraki will be sent across the mainland. They are going to go to Pentos, and they will wait for Dany's boats to arrive to take them across the narrow sea. So they're going to be burning a trail right across the center of Essos. Dany is going to be going around the south coast. She has to take on Karth. I don't think she's going to go the wrong way, take on Karth as a city. She'll probably leave the city alone, but the Karth fleet is going to come and she will destroy that. The Volantis fleet is going to be destroyed. She's going to leave Slavers Bay, and a decision will be made as to she's going to leave someone there in charge of it. Now, what they did on the show was that it was Dario who was left there in charge. That might happen in the books, something like that. Someone she trusts to be left, because what the lesson that she will have taken from Astapor and Yunkai was that she didn't leave one of her people. She trusted some of the locals who just effectively went back to their old ways. So she will want somebody that she knows that she can put in charge. Which leaves open the possibility, and I'm not saying I think this will happen, but the possibility is someone like Sir Barristan could be left there. He has effectively been ruling the city in her absence, and so maybe he could be left there. I'm not saying that will happen, or I think that will happen, but it's certainly something that she will have to think about. After she's left there, then yes, Volantis is the next stop. They have sent fleets out to try and destroy her. She will have to destroy them. She will free the slaves. We're going to get some encounter between her and Bonero, I'm sure, linking in with the Red Priests. Then what does she do? She has to go past Lys. Lys has got, I think it's 7 slaves to every non-slave. She will want to free them on the way past, I'm sure. What about Tyrosh and Mir? She could do, but it's heading up then to Pentos is the next stop. Picking up, they will just get the Dothraki going through them. She will leave the Tatter Prince in charge there, I suspect. So that's what it is. I think that the entire map of Essos is going to be overturned by her army and her navy heading westwards. And this is going to build up this feeling that it's not just she's got a big army, maybe she'll do all right. Nothing is standing in her way. This is an impossible army to be defeating. She's got the greatest cavalry in the world in the Dothraki. She's got the greatest infantry in the world in the Unsullied. She's got the Iron Fleet that she will have got off of Victarion. She's got dragons. She has got she will have built up by that point. She's got her own maester. She will have got Tyrion there advising her. She is going to start, she's going to have sellsword companies with her. This is going to start looking incredibly hard for anyone to oppose her. And so that is what we're going to get end at the point of Winds of Winter, when she finally arrives at Westeros or Dragonstone, probably. Who could possibly stop her? At the same time, at the north, we're going to have the others coming south. Who can possibly stop them? This is a song of ice and fire. We have ice and fire finally crashing into the two sides of Westeros, and will be squashing humanity in between the two. So that is the feel that we're going to be having from this. Reflective Rambling, thank you very much. Picking up, as you so often do, Reflective Rambling, I hugely appreciate it. Ian Kaplinski's question saying, what do the Volantines have to qualify them as heirs to Valyria, tech or mysteries? Well, neither is what they are claiming. Yes, I'm sure that they have some tech and some mysteries, but it's Firstly, the fact that they are the first daughter of Valyria. That is the title they claim. This was the first outpost from Valyria, and the Black Walls were there. All these other places, the other free cities, came later. So they are the first, and that is why they think that they are the heirs. They're also the closest to where Valyria was, and they have got the highest number who can trace direct lineage back to Old Valyria. So it's to do with history rather than the fact that they've got the hidden knowledge. It seems to be in Cohort as much as anywhere else. Braavos seems to have been making the greatest scientific advances, but Volantis just believes that they're the best, and so that's what it is. And they are the biggest city, and they were the first settlement. So yeah, but it's not built on any particular competitive advantage. Deborah Pollard, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, "Hi Robert, I can't say enough how much I enjoy these live streams. They are a bright spot in my week." Oh, that's a really sweet thing to say. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I can share a little bit of positivity and shared enjoyment in something that we all love. Maybe you already spoke on this, but could Valyria be compared to the fall of Rome or even Atlantis? Thank you. I haven't spoken on this. I mean, I think what I might do, actually, thinking about it, maybe I'll do Valyria as my live stream next week before we move on to Slaver's Bay. But anyway, I will answer this one now. Yes, the idea is very much Rome. George R. R. Martin, as we have talked about many times, he loves sort of drawing analogies from history. Now, this isn't 100% true. This is not exactly how history worked, but at a high level, and how history has generally been taught, Rome fell, and it's a very Eurocentric view of the world, but then the Dark Ages happened. We lost all of the great knowledge that we had that came from Rome, and then it's only a long time after that people started to struggle back towards civilization. Even the names of the tribes that attacked Rome and caused the downfall of Rome are now in our language associated with acts of terrible sort of barbarism. The Vandals were the group who came and destroyed Rome, and vandalism is still a word we use in the English language for destroying things that oughtn't to be destroyed. So this is Rome, and it was a great empire which spanned an entire continent, and then it fell. That is the feeling he's got going on. Atlantis is an interesting one. So he hasn't got, in Tolkien, has got a clear Atlantis in Numenor, and that's going to be the focus of the TV show when that happens on Amazon. It's probably going to be in about a year or so before we see that, but that is very much the idea, the pinnacle of civilization, the best that humanity can do, but then it fell crashing into the water. Yes, there is the falling, crashing into the water in one fell swoop kind of feel to this, but I don't think George R. R. Martin is trying to suggest that Valyrian society itself was the pinnacle of humanity. They probably thought that they were, but then every civilization thinks that they were. So yes, Rome is very much the idea that he's been building on. Where did we get to? Let's go with so Dominic Vaughan. I think I've answered your question already about Stefan Baratheon. And the bride for Rhaegar, which he didn't find. But you also asked about the maze makers of Lorath, with the fused black stone. Do you think this will ever have any meaningful part to play in the overarching plot, or just cool world building extras, Cthulhu mythos acknowledgements? Okay, so for those who are unaware, so Lorath is the furthest north. I mean, I think, well, ish. The possibly Bravos might be slightly further north, but it's the sort of the most isolated north. And it's an ancient city and culture which has gone through various different iterations. You get the priests of Boash, who went there, founded the city, but before that there were the hairy men, who we know very little about, and before that were the maze makers. Now, what we've never been to Lorath in any of the books, but we hear the stories of it, is that cut into the stone as these huge mazes, seemingly for giant people, some on the ground, on the surface, some underground, some built out of just cut into normal rocks. Some seem to be with kind of some black stone. There seems to be a speculation that this seems quite similar or linked to what is at the bottom of the high tower, which is this kind of maze, underground catacombs that are going on there. Now, what is being shown there? Yes, there's some cool world building going on there. Yes, there's some sort of like when you talk about Cthulhu mythos acknowledgements, yes, there's this idea that things happened in this world well before we know, and stuff that we can't possibly understand. And there's a lot of that across Essos, these ancient, not just ancient cultures, but people's beings that are perhaps beyond even our imagination and understanding, that are lurking somehow below the surface. That's the kind of feel we're getting there. But I think the main thing across to, I don't think we're going to go to Lorath in the stories. I don't think it's going to have a particular direct relevance. But the main thing I think he's doing with relevance to the High Tower is to show us that this is ancient. Now, we knew this already, and when we're talking about old, then we have in Westeros, then yes, we've got things like the Wall and Storm's End and the Winterfell crypts, which all seem to be right back to the sort of the Age of Heroes, the First Long Night, that kind of thing, perhaps even earlier, but linked possibly with this idea of Bran the Builder, who is connected with all of those things. Bran the Builder is connected into the High Tower, but he built, I think it was the fourth attempt at building a tower there, when he was the one who built the one that actually worked, the stone one, the one that we have now. But there were 3 wooden attempts before that, and before that there was underneath it still this kind of like catacomb maze-like thing on this island. And I think what that is trying to say is that you think those other things are ancient. This is even more ancient. This is very, very old, perhaps before humans were even there. So that, I think, is what George R.R. Martin is trying to show us, that yet again in Westeros we have an impossibly ancient island which seems incredibly significant. We've got Isle of Faces, we've got Dragonstone, we've got Starfall, we've got Battle Isle, which is where the High Tower's built. So that, I think, is what he's doing. He's trying to show the age of the High Tower, or Battle Isle, which is where the High Tower was built. Leot Rubenfeld says, I think it shows that dragons used to be all over the world. Yeah, I mean, I think it's there are certain hints that there are things that used to be worldwide, and whereas now the world is divided up into lots of these smaller empires and cities and things like that, in the ancient days than there were things which spanned the entire continent. Question from, I've got about 3 more questions now, so now is a good time to drop some more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many as I can. Lady Dane saying, I find Penny to be one of the most pathetic characters in the novels. She is naive and unfortunately rather stupid, to be blunt. Is she simply a negative image of Tyrion who feels he must think of her with some compassion? So Penny is a book-only character. She is a dwarf like Tyrion, and she she starts out attacking Tyrion with a knife because a bounty's out on Tyrion's head, and her brother had been killed by somebody, thinking that that person might be Tyrion, and so she then is angry and when she sees Tyrion, she attacks him, but she ends up with him and Ser Jorah heading off eastwards on a boat. And she stays with him all the way through to the end of the story, where we're at right now, in the camp of the Second Sons outside Meereen. Now, yes, to start with, when you read it the first time through, she's quite a annoying character, it has to be said. She is quite simple, and she's yes, naive, I think is probably a good way of saying it, but she clearly serves a narrative purpose, and the narrative purpose is definitely connected in, obviously, with Tyrion. And I think part of this is, you say, is she just a negative mirror image of Tyrion? Well, in partly, yes, in that he can look at her and see someone like him in terms of stature, and this allows him to see himself in a way, but actually look at himself more objectively than he did before. Is that he's always had this, you build all the insults and turn them into your armor and all the rest of it. But as much as I love the character of Tyrion, he did grow up in the 1%, and he was incredibly privileged, and he simply does not understand all the time how the other half live. And through Penny, he gets to see that she has to do certain things because of the way that people will treat her. He has always been able to get away out of situations through money, through his intelligence, through his wit and charm. He can work his way through most problems, but she cannot. And so when there's a problem on the ship, she persuades him to do some mock jousting. This is what she'd been trained to do to amuse everyone else, so that they will laugh at these two people, and then they'll not want to hurt them. And Tyrion doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to demean himself, but he has to understand this is how other people who have not grown up with the privilege that he has have to go through and endure. So it allows him to start seeing himself for who he actually is. And the journey that Tyrion takes down after he leaves King's Landing, he's in an incredibly bad place. He's drinking heavily. He's not sure if he even wants to live. And you do get, through Penny's involvement with him, you do get to this point where he now starts to think that there is a point to live. And that is really important, because if it was just him and Jorah, then he probably wouldn't have got to that point. And that is what her literary point is. It is definitely just about Tyrion, so that when he does finally get back into Meereen and back into the courts of power, meets Daenerys again, he actually has some hope in him. He actually has some drive back in him. He actually wants to to do good in the world. And I hope that it makes him a slightly better, slightly humbler person. I don't know whether it will, but that is certainly the hope. Because he starts off not viewing her in a very good light, but in the end he's starting to understand her, and therefore understand what a lot of people have to go through. He even, the kinds of things that he would personally himself react to negatively, he thinks about her. He says she's almost pretty if she weren't a dwarf, or if you could get past the fact that she was a dwarf. And it's like, if somebody would say that to him, he would immediately come back with some barbed comment to them. But he is being forced to see that element in himself. Okay, so couple more, but they're not already questions. Actually, so comments really from my patrons. So now drop some more questions into the chat. I will try and pick up a few before we end. Diego Godoy saying, no question this week. I just wanted to say thank you. A couple of years ago, I was not reading a lot, but then I discovered In Deep Geek, became a huge A Song of Ice and Fire fan, and read the books in a few months. I honestly hadn't read that eagerly since high school. I'd also never read the Lord of the Rings books, but when you started producing content on them, I realized I had to read them too. So I spent the last couple of months doing that, and I'm now done. Thanks for reviving my love of books and fantasy in general. I cannot thank you enough. Well, I read all of that out because that, for me, it's wonderful. I love the idea that I can play a small part in inspiring people to read. I love reading myself, and if I can inspire people to read and discover things that they otherwise would not have done, even if it's things that many people have discovered before, like the Lord of the Rings, then I feel humbled and happy by that. So, Diego, thank you so much. You're a huge supporter of the channel, I know, and thank you. And I feel very humble and grateful for that. And the Greasy Strangler saying, no question, but I'd like to wish you and all your listeners a very happy Easter weekend. And I would like to extend that to everyone as well. If you celebrate Easter, then I hope you have a very happy Easter. Similarly, if you're celebrating Passover or something else at this time, then I hope you have a fantastic time. Andrew K in the chat saying, and Andrew, one of my moderators, I've got some fantastic moderators who do brilliant stuff. If you're watching live, if you're in the chat live, then please do just say a quick thank you to the moderators. They do excellent work, just making sure that the chat goes along wonderfully well. Yeah. So, Andrew, thank you. Could the taking of Volantis from Dany cause a mass regional relent? Such an emphatic statement or conquest could have a lot of reverberating strategic benefits for Dany. Yeah, so I think that definitely if she takes Volantis, people will notice. The Slavers Bay, yes, people have heard, there's new person over in Slavers Bay, but people know about Volantis in Westeros. Slavers Bay seems a long way away. Volantis everyone has heard of. So this will cause huge ructions, and it will cause huge ructions right across the continent of Essos as well. The big wild card in this, I think, is Braavos. I talked about this a bit last week, but if you think about what I've just described as the most likely thing to be happening, the Dothraki ravaging their way across central Essos, Dany heading across the south coast of Essos, we've got Yunkai, Astapor, Meereen, Volantis, Lys falling before her, Pentos falling. What is Braavos going to do? Braavos is immediately going to have to go on a defensive war footing. We've already seen some political movement in Braavos, and I think that there's going to be a huge shift. J Kelsey 55 saying, "Hi Robert, you're the man, obviously." Thank you. How often do you encounter show only fans on your channel? I'm surprised anyone would be watching these videos and not having read the books. I don't think I can really put a number on. What I find is that there a huge variety of people watch my videos and these live streams. Some people have read all of the books many times over. Quite a lot of people have read them once through a while ago. Others have read some of them. Some have just watched the TV show. So it's a wide variety. Yes, I think now, particularly as we're in the bit of furthest away from Game of Thrones, the TV show, and its successor shows, and I think that more than before, or probably will come after, this is book fans. But yeah, there definitely are people out there. All are welcome, is what I say. So I don't ever assume that people have read the books, or indeed the books are so huge and so dense that even if you have read them, you definitely won't remember everything unless you've read through them a few times, I don't think. Had a question from John Martin. Thank you, Robert, and thank you to the old mods and the new. Yeah, there are many mods. Thank you very much. Mike Hall saying, we have never seen water magic in the current day. Is it real or exaggerated legends of complex Rhoynish defenses? What about the Hammer of the Waters? Yeah, so we've seen there are legends of huge bits of water magic, so to speak, in the past. The Hammer of the Waters sundering Westeros and Essos, causing the Stepstones. There was a land bridge across there. Another attempt which nearly managed to break Westeros in half, but in fact just created the neck. These things are legends. They might not be 100% true, so we can't necessarily, and George R. Martin tells us this, so we can't necessarily hold them to be true. The Rhoynish magic that created grayscale seems to still have a lasting relevance. Have we seen any water magic in the world at the moment? Well, it depends on what you count as being water magic. It's one of those things that, yes, the fire magic is obviously a lot more showy that we've got, but Patchface coming back, everybody thought he was dead, and then he seems to be alive. That seems to be quite water magic-y. What's happening with the Ironborn, Euron seems to you have to read between the lines, but he does seem to have an ability to speed up and slow down fleets and ships, causing weather issues. He seems to be able to do this. So there are some kinds of water magic that are there if you start reading between the lines. But my take is that all the magic is coming sort of, it's obeying the same rules. Berus Aurelius just wanted to say thanks for the great videos and live streams. Happy Easter and God bless. Well, thank you very much. A happy Easter back to you as well. Let's see if we've got any more questions before. Andrew Kay saying definitely a big part of the mission here, getting people back into the text or introducing them to it for those who have not done so yet. Yeah, I absolutely, I love introducing people to the books. The books are absolutely fantastic, and the wider stories around it as well. I think we're going to see a lot more people starting to dive into them. When we get House of the Dragon, more people will be interested in Fire and Blood. Absolutely. If Dunk and Egg happens as a TV show in some way, people are going to be wanting those stories. So yeah, there will be an increased demand for them. Similarly, the Lord of the Rings as well. I can definitely see an upsurge in interest in things like the Silmarillion when people go, hang on a moment, what's the Second Age again? And that is partly what I'm trying to do in my videos in Lord of the Rings is to try and introduce people to some of these contexts. We understand what's happening at the end of the Third Age, Gandalf and Aragorn and Frodo and all the rest of it. But back where this series is going to be based, a lot of people don't know so much. So hopefully it's starting to try and introduce people. J. Kelsey 55 saying, if you had to pick someone to be king or queen at the end besides Bran, who would you pick? I think. It's a good question. I'm hovering over my controversial answer was the first thing that came into my mind. So I'll give the controversial answer is Sansa. I think that Sansa will be Queen in the North in one way or another, Lady of Winterfell at the end of it. And I think that her journey, although she starts as not at all an ideal candidate, by the time she gets to the end, she will have grown hugely. That this is where her story arc is taking her. But if I had to pick anyone to be king or queen at the end, I think he would hate it, but someone like Davos would be wonderful, because he's always, he's there with the advice for people, and yes, he wants to be the second in, the person whispering in the king's ear rather than the king. But I think that he would have the humility to get people alongside him to advise him, and he is more than happy to take decisions. So I think that he would actually, and obviously he cares about people, so I think he would actually be a great king. So yeah, campaign starts here. King Davos. Ian Kaplinski saying the meteors are almost a subtext at this point. Will they play a major part in the lore, if not the story? Yeah, in the lore, they certainly they herald things as much as anything else. The question is about the extent to which they bring the magic rather than herald it. That's the only issue that we've got going on. Nick Richardson saying in both the shows and the books, they make a big point of arguing that the best ruler is the one who doesn't want that power. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a fair point. And this is where Jon actually comes through very well. He does not want to be the ruler. He doesn't put himself forward for being the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch and so on. Totesbracken Leben Langer, if Sansa without her head for figures will be Lady of Winterfell, who will be the good steward Arya wishes her to have? It's a good question. I don't know. Could Jane Poole survive? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. But yes, I think you're right that. So this, for those who don't know what the reference is, if you go right back to, I think it's probably the first Arya chapter in the first book, and they're being taught how to sew and all the rest of it, and it comes out that Arya's not really got a head for figures. And Arya thinks that she would need somebody with head for figures there. So I don't know. The fact that Jane Poole was sat by their side at the time, and she has to have something good happen to her, really, doesn't she? I hope so. Okay. All right. I think with that, I'm going to start drawing this one to a close. Next week, we are going to be looking at Valyria. I've just decided that's old Valyria, what happened, the doom of Valyria, what was the culture like of the Valyrians and all the rest of it. All of that stuff we will do next week. If you are watching this back, not live, a little bit later, then there will be a link appearing somewhere around here to other live streams that I have done and there will be a link appearing somewhere around here to my Patreon page if you'd like to support this channel, or if you'd like to get access to some patron-only benefits. Okay, thanks everyone, some fantastic questions. Thank you, moderators. Take care. If you celebrate it, have a wonderful Easter. I will see you again next week. Bye now.